Hey everybody, welcome and thank you for joining me on Rethinking Components. My name is David Soden. Let's begin. So to kick things off, let's talk about what we're going to go over today, essentially. Okay, and the first one is going to be understanding the three different types of components. Next, we want to talk about encapsulation versus inheritance. Now, again, we're still talking about components, right? So this is the components, encapsulation versus inheritance. Next, we want to talk about the three component types. Now, there used to be two. As of the third quarter 2021, they've introduced a third one, and we're going to cover that. The next one is component parameters. Now, these are the parameters within the component types, and we want to showcase that as well. And so all of this is going to be done and shown to you in a demo. So to begin, let's talk about the three kinds of components. Now, the first one is going to be your local application component. Now, you may be saying, okay, local application component, or maybe you're new to components, period, and you don't even know what I'm talking about. So let's show you what a local component is. Let me kick this over into the browser, and here I am in a blank canvas app, okay? And so in the tree view, here's your screens, but there's a tab here, and it's called components. So if I go ahead and create a new component, that's a local component. It's local to the application. It's inside of the application, okay? So that's what I mean by local component. Next, what I want to talk about is this idea of fully encapsulated to the application. So what does that mean? Encapsulation is basically to be inside of something. So if you think about HTTPS, right? That is encapsulated in a secure connection. Another way to think about it is there's a metal pipe, a conduit, and maybe you stick a you stick a wire through that metal pipe, right? So that metal pipe is the I guess a shroud or something, a metal shroud to protect the cable, maybe, from digging and breaking the cable. So you would say that the cable is encapsulated inside of that pipe, okay? So in this case, the component is inside of the application. So that's really what we're talking about when we mention that fancy term encapsulated, okay? The other thing that you can understand is that you can both export these components that are encapsulated in your application as well as import them. Let me show you that too. So I don't have anything here, but let's just go ahead and create a blank or empty component in here. So now I have component 1. It doesn't do anything. We haven't done anything with it. I can go ahead and I can import components or export. Now I can only do it up here when I go to the component, not the component level, right? So first I have to be on the component view in the tree view, but then where it says new component, there's this ellipsis, and that's where these options are. I can import and export them here. So that's what I'm talking about, okay? So the next thing is an idea called a component library. Okay, now this is not in the application anymore. We've got to go kind of out a level, and so let's go back out to where the applications are that live in our particular environment. So here we got the applications, right? Well, guess what? There's this other area called component libraries. So if we click over into the component libraries, we see that I have a COM library example here. Now yours will be blank. It won't have anything in it. As a matter of fact, in the demo later, we're going to go ahead and show you how to add this. So I'll just go ahead and delete that here. And I think it's trying to delete, or maybe it won't delete. Anyway, let's try to refresh the screen. Maybe that'll help it. All right. Maybe. Okay, good. It did delete. All right, so in any event, the component library is where you're going to have these components that I just showed you, but they're going to be at the library or environmental level. And so these have full inheritance. So you may be saying, what does that mean? So think about a component that I create, or you create, or anybody creates, right? If you have them local, you can only see them and use them locally. Now, if you want to use that in a second app, a third app, or many apps, you're going to have to import or first export the components from the first app that you made. Then you're going to have to import them into each subsequent app. And if you ever made a change, say, to the original app, because that's maybe where the component is and you consider it authoritative, any changes that you make will never make it to the second, third, and fourth app, right? And that may be a very, very good thing. On the flip side, it may be a very bad thing because, maybe you want to have strict, stringent controls over centralization of your components. And if that is the case, you're going to want to put these at the environmental level. And then what you would do is inherit the component from the environment level, and any changes made to the component in the library at the environmental level will propagate down to the app. Now, warning, if you make a change that breaks something, you have the chance of breaking a lot of apps at the same time. Now, to be fair, when you go in and edit the app, if it notices a change, it will ask you if you want to update to the latest version of that component. Okay, so as long as you don't do that, you should be completely fine. Now, keep in mind, all of this is in preview. A lot of these component library items and things around a component, a lot of the functionality is still in preview. But you really need to start wrapping your heads around this, because there is going to be a general availability of this pretty soon. A lot of these functions have been in preview well over a year, so these are going to drop to GA probably, I would say, sometime the beginning, first, second quarter of next year at the latest, if I had to guess. Now, I don't have any inside information. That's totally just my guess. All right, so the next thing that we want to talk about here is that the libraries, actually we already talked about that the libraries can be added to your apps and things of that nature, but more importantly, you can add them to a solution. So if you're not sure what solutioning is, there's tons of videos out there on the internet. Maybe I'll make one myself, but I have a solution. This is a way of bundling up applications as well as the flows, and in this particular instance, I don't have anything here, but I could add an existing, and I could come down here to more and see component library. I can add a component library to my solution. So as I export my solution from my environment here and maybe want to move it to a different environment, then that's a good thing, because then I can take a lot of this with me, and this is now part of my solution. So if you understand solutions and the benefits of that, just know that when you do the component libraries, you can bundle them up in a solution as well. Now, in the event that you do local encapsulation or local application components, those are part of the application. So as long as your app's part of the solution, the components come along with it. And again, you can export the components, import new components, and things of that nature. But you do manually have to keep track of that, or you're going to lose functionality or potentially break something. Another thing to understand is the parent, master, and then the child, which is the inheritant, right? So when it comes to component libraries, the component library is the master, and it is the place that you go to and make all of the edits, and the child just inherits all of that gene pool information from the components, and it gets inherited into the child object. Another, and the third or final type of component that can get really, really tricky for some folks is the component framework from PowerApps, or PowerApps component framework. And it's important because there's a website called pcfgalleries.com that has a place for you to download all of these PCF component galleries. Now, these are components that are professionally developed, and if you go out here to docs.microsoft.com/en, anyway, I'm not going to read the URL to you, but if you want to screenshot this right now, you can go into the component libraries. When you do this, you build them for Canvas apps as well as model-driven apps, and you really, really can do a lot of extensible stuff inside of both the Canvas app as well as a model-driven app. So highly suggest that you go and check this out if you're a traditional developer and not a low-code, no-code developer, because this is where you can go in and do some really exciting and stellar stuff. Take all of your applications up to the next level. Now, that being said, there is a caveat, and I do want to show you that, so I'm going to jump back over into the environment here. I'm going to go back out to solutions. We're going to come over here to apps just so that I can see everything, make sure I'm where I need to be. And up here on the corner where the cog is, you want to go into the PowerApps Admin Center. And if you're going to use these PCF galleries, and this is what this stuff is, these are the PCF components, right? PowerApps Component Framework, keyword framework. And so let me go back to my slide real quick, because I do want to put an emphasis on something for you. Let's go back here. Let's go back one slide. So 3 different kinds of components. Just remember these keys: local, library, and framework. Everything else is called a component, and that's why people get so spun around and confused in their head, because they don't know the 3 different kinds. So just remember the keywords are local, library, which is at the environment level, and then the framework. That's what we're talking about here and right now. All right, switching back over into the Power Platform Admin Center. Again, got to it from the cog, clicked on Admin Center. You may or may not have access to your environmental admin center, but assuming you do, you'll go ahead, you'll click the environment that's your environment, and then when you click in, the first thing you want to do is go to Settings. And then after you get into the settings, you want to go into the product features or behaviors or things of that nature. It's under product, right? So click on behavior, and then, I'm sorry, it's features. I don't know why I clicked on the wrong one. In any event, product features. And then what you have to do is just flip a switch that allows you to use the component framework in your environment. PowerApps component framework for Canvas apps, okay? That's when you download items here. So for example, here's, let's see here, adaptive cards. I don't even know what this one is. I've never looked at it before. In any event, maybe you want to grab this one. You can download it, okay? Then when you download it, actually this is for a model-driven app because that's what it says right here. So in any event, find something for a Canvas app. Point is you download it, and then when you try to go to upload it and use it, you're going to run into a major problem where you're going to get errors. You're not going to know what that means, and it's probably because you haven't flipped this bit. So you want to allow the publishing of Canvas apps with code components. Now, if you're in an enterprise and you have an enterprise that has a security department or security team or somebody in security, before flipping the switch on this, or even if you don't, just be aware of what you're doing, because this is a public area that people could post anything up here. There is the potential to have somebody upload some malicious code, right? And so you shouldn't just bake and download this stuff ignorantly. You should at least try to go in and understand what it's doing, see what calls it's making to outside third-party services, APIs, things of that nature, just to make sure that it's not doing something that you don't want it to do. Even if you're not a coder, you should be able to at least understand the URLs and where things are and going. But in any event, you should have some sort of a strategy around reviewing this. So don't just ignorantly flip this switch, download something, and put it in, okay? So that could maybe end up in bad, or end up in a bad way for you and or your company. So just be careful about that. I'm not trying to discourage you for not doing it. I'm just saying, just, use some common sense and caution. All right, so that being said, we need to go back to the slide here. All right, on the next one. Okay, let's talk about component types. So when we're making components, the first thing that we need to do is we need to say, okay, when I go into the component, say for local, right? I say new component, which you saw me do, and it came out as like component_1. You have to tell it what type of component is this going to be. Is this going to be a component for input? And so what does that mean? So whatever I do in the component, I might want to set a property value. And we see this already when we drag widgets from onto the canvas. There's a bunch of properties that we can set. Well, all of those properties that we set are input values, right? And so we might set a color, we might set a pixel size or width or dimension and all of that information. So that's what an input type is on the component. The other one is an output. And a lot of times people don't really understand this or how it can be used. There's a terminology called headless versus not headless in some application development or some type of frameworks. It essentially means no graphical interface or no user interface. And so if you're used to traditional programming, or even if Power Automate, think about Power Automate, right? You can create something, you do some logical function, you call it, and there's no interface to it, right? You just call it in code. You create the Power App or the Power Automate flow, and then you call it, and then it returns a value. And so that's the same thing. The return value to your Power Apps is the output of that particular Power Automate flow that you have run, and that value you receive back and do something with it and or process it in some way. The same thing could be done inside of your component, and I'll show you a demo or an example of that. And so this is the return function. Think of it in the sense of a headless application. Maybe you just want to, you're doing the same thing again and again and again in the app, and you don't want to keep writing that code. Well, throw it into a code component with a type of output, and then just set your data type that we'll talk about in just a few minutes. And then finally is the behavior. Think of the behavior as a way of dealing with events like on click, on change, on whatever, right? And so that's what the behavior type is. So this would be like a listener so that we can take information or detect changes inside of the component and send that information back out to the parent Canvas app so it can do something with it. And I'll show you an example of that as well. Now keep in mind, behaviors are only good when you're dealing with components that are local to the application, meaning they're encapsulated in the app. That's when you get this third and final option. If you're working on the environment level one, then you're not going to have the opportunity to see this, or you may not see it in a pull down. You may say something's broken or there's a bug. There's no bug. It's only available for local components. All right. So next, let's talk about the component parameters and regarding the types of the input, the input, the output, or the behavior. These are the data types that we can use for the inputs, for the outputs. And you can see there's an impressive number of not only data types, but objects as well. Screens, records, images, audio, video, colors, currency, all these data types. Absolutely huge. So when you understand the breadth of what you can do here, you're going to be saying, wow, there's a lot of stuff that we probably need to componentize, and it will save us a bunch of work in having to rewrite the same things again and again and again. All right, so now let's get into that demo that I promised you guys. So let me close out of here. Okay, we are now in the Canvas app, and what I want to do is to show you all of these different screens, 5 different screens, and I'm going to click over to components. I've created 5 different components here to showcase a bunch of different features for you. I want to start off with this first one that we're going to cover, which is var, example. So if I open this up and I look at it, so there's a couple of different ways. If you're not used to components, you need to think about it in different ways. Think of a component like a Canvas app inside of a Canvas app, okay? Because when you get to it, you're going to get a screen. You can add things into it just like you would on a Canvas app. So it's a Canvas app inside of a Canvas app. Just think of it that way. So if you know how to make a Canvas app, then making a component is going to be pretty simple for you, except for when we start talking about these custom properties. And that's really where you're going to get spun around and or confused potentially really quick. So pay attention when we get into that area. All right, so we've got a canvas, and my canvas is pretty straightforward and simple. I have a rectangle that has a color on it. I could have also just easily gotten rid of the rectangle, so let's do that now. I'll delete the rectangle, and so now that you'll see the label on the screen, but I want to bring that blue color back. So I'm going to go to the component. So this is just like the screen, right? A component in this case is like a screen. So it has a fill property. So I'm going to change that to just do blue, but I can come over here and just pick that blue. So I'm going to do that. All right, so now the background of my component, of my screen, is that, right? So far it's almost just like making a Canvas app, and I have a label on the screen. And so on the label, if we look at it, I have some text for the text property of the label. It just says my global variable is, and then I'm concatenating in this var example pass global var. And we're saying, okay, well, where does that come in? So this var example, notice, is the same name as the component, right? So namespace, or parent-child in the naming space convention. The parent object is var example, and then one of its child properties, just like the fill property, right? I created my own custom property, and I called it pass glob var. And if I click into it, you can see I can set the name to anything I want. Its type is input. Remember the 3 types I told you about? We got input, output, and behavior. This example is an example of an input. And then it's going to take some text. Okay, so we're going to pass some text into the component, and then we're going to display it essentially in the label. But before we call it and pass anything in, I have to change the property to that custom property. And in order to do that, I got to click on the pass var example. And if I do that, here's my custom property, pass glob var. My default value is null. But when I use it inside of the Canvas app, which now will come out to the screen because this will make a lot more sense that we've seen all of that, I have a component here. And the component, I put it on the screen. And the component has a bunch of properties, right? Here's that blue. If I don't like it, I want to change it to green, I can change it to green. If I want to change it to this red, I can change it to the red. See, I'm setting the property of the component, essentially of the screen of the component outside here. And I created this custom property called pass glob var. And so what I'm doing is I'm passing in a variable that's a global variable. And so maybe we probably need to go at the application on start and see what I'm doing here. So I have a global variable called var global, and its value is gv22. I also have a table that we're going to use in a little bit, but this is a collection that I've created here. So I've got two things on the application on start, and so that's what's going on. So if we look at this component and its property, pass glob var, which takes a text, and the variable that's global is the gv22, its value is. So that essentially that's what I'm passing into the component. And so the component can then use what I've passed in, which is the input parameter, this pass glob var, and it's using that in the concatenation thing that you saw me do, okay? So this is the quick wins of components, right? This is how you can do headers and footers without having to copy and paste them between screens, especially if you have a lot of complexity in your headers and footers. You don't want to keep creating it again and again and again and again. Creating a reference to it is much better. It increases the performance of your app. It also makes it easier and more manageable to change things. Okay, so this is the most simplest example. So we're going to get a little bit more complicated in the next example. We're going to do essentially the same thing, but I'm going to show you ways of tearing down scope. And this is brand new. Came out in, I believe, the third quarter of 2021. And so let's go look at this component. So let's roll up this. Let's go to the next one. This is a access global var example. So we have a lot of things going on in this. So first of all, the canvas, the screen of this is not really that important in this particular example. I'm using this as a way of what's called a headless app. I don't want the component on the screen. I don't want to see the component. There's nothing I need from the component, because what I'm doing is I have another custom property, but it's an output property, which means I'm going to be delivering information, in this case text. So let me click into it so you can see that. So I'm returning some text, and its property type is output, and its data type is text. Not only that, I'm accepting two parameters when I call it. So I'm taking this one string in as required, and then I'm taking an optional string. Now I named it get global var. I could have named it anything, but this is just kind of a little helper to help me understand that I need to pass in a global variable here. Okay, so actually I went ahead and deleted that, and I shouldn't have done that. Okay, through some video editing magic, I've added my accidentally deleted get global var parameter back. And so if I click into it, which is what I wanted to do, not delete it, you can see it's taking a text parameter, and it's just me giving it a name and prompting, what is this thing going to be used for. So now that you see, hopefully you've got your head wrapped around this, because there's layers and layers. So I guess if you looked at this from the top down. So first we have the component itself. The component has all kinds of properties, okay? These are built-in properties: content, language, fill, height, on, reset, width, right? These are all built into the component. These are part of the component. I created this return text. That's the custom property, and you can see that over here. And then you see two children underneath it. These are the parameters. So not only can you create a property, but you can also create parameters. And these parameters are what's passed in. So even though this is an output parameter, I can take parameters which are input. So the return text parameter, or property rather, will take in two parameters. It's going to process those two parameters in scope of this return text. And then whatever it does, so here I have return text. This is the property inside the component. You can see what I'm doing here. I'm taking one of my parameters, I'm adding it to a static string called space something new space, and then I'm adding in that optional second parameter. So all I'm doing is doing a concatenation of some static text and two properties. One of them's required, one of them's not required, and so that's what's going to come back that I can now leverage on my screen. So I want you to go ahead and see that happening on the screen. So let's collapse this up. And here we go. I have a text label on the screen. And in that text label, I'm simply just calling the global variable that's in the onStart, right, for the app. I'm not doing anything with the component. This is just a label, and I'm calling the value to be pulled in from the global variable. Here, on this text box, I also am setting its text property, but how I'm doing it, I'm calling the functionality of this headless application, meaning this headless component, meaning there's no interface. If I scroll out, you'll see actually what I did. Here it is, you can see it on screen. Now the properties of this, because it's on the screen, right, it's there. But what I did is I offset it by a -200 because its size is 200. So if I made it -200, it just slides it off screen. You could also take this and set its visible to false. Right now its visibility is set to true. I could also set it to false and it's gone. I personally like to see it. I like to keep them off screen so that I know they're there. And if I can see them off screen, at least, like I said, I know they're there and maybe I can interact with them and I won't forget about them. But that's my personal preference. You can do what I'm doing here, or you can set the visibility to false. Your choice. Okay, so let's go back in and break this down a little bit further. All right, so here what I'm doing is I'm calling the custom component by its name. I'm using the dot notation because then from here, let me just back this out. So by using the dot notation, I see all of the properties. I can set the fill, I can set the height, I can set its visibility, and then I have that custom one, that return text, remember? And this is type output. So what's going to happen is I'm going to get a value back, which is great because I'm in the text property of my label. And I'm going to leverage and take advantage of what's returned because I know it's text. And I'm going to use it here in the text box. So that's why I'm calling the custom property return text. And as you remember, I can pass in two parameters. So first I'm going to pass in hello, and then I'm going to pass in the variable, which is the global variable. Okay? So here you go. Now I can see that I got hello, something new, and then GV22. If I were to change this to my name, David, now I get David something new, and the var globe is still GV22. If you want, we can go over to the app. We can change the global variable to 23 just so that we see a change in it. I do have to run the onStart again to update the variable. Anyway, so now that we see the change is there. So that's something that's really, really interesting and really, really helpful. So let's go back inside the component. There's one other thing I want to show you here. Another thing that I can do is access the global variable at the application level, its parent. So right now I'm in the component. The component lives on its own, but there's a new feature this month, or it was either this month or last month. In any event, third quarter, I believe, of this year, 2021. This access app scope is now here. If you flip that bit, you'll see what I'm talking about here. So let me spin open this component, and there's a label component. With this being set, meaning, let me go back to the component. This, when I say this being set, I mean access app scope. It's off by default. So if I turn that off, see, I get an error, which means that there's a security mechanism in place. It says I can't get to and I can't see what's outside of the component. See, now I get this thing that's telling me the name isn't valid because it can't access it. Even though the component is on the screen, that's kind of the gateway, but I have to basically open the door or put the key in the lock to open it up. So I do that at the access level. It says, you know, I want you to be able to access data and information that is at the component level, that is at the application level or the Canvas app level. And when I flip that on, I can now access the global variables. I can access the collection that I made on start and all kinds of other things. So, you know, use this security consciously the way that you want. Some good things or bad things might or might not come about. But just know that, you know, great power, great responsibility, that kind of thing. All of this stuff is still in somewhat preview, so it is interesting to see that it's there. This may change, but as of right now, does not look like this is going to change because the entire component stuff has been around for quite a while. So in any event, just know that now you can access this by toggling and flipping the switch on and off. So there's another caveat to that. So I used the global variable in the label directly, okay? And so that's fine. I can use that in my properties of widgets. In this case, the widget is the label. I could have added a gallery, and then I could have accessed the collection and put that in there. And you'll see that I'm going to do that later. I'm going to show that to you in just a minute. And then I also have other things that I can access. Where I can't use the global variable or access the tables or the data of the collection is inside of my custom properties. So if I were to try to concatenate and not get the global variable, if I were to try to just use it straight up here, it wouldn't work. It's still out of scope, even though I flipped the switch. So just know, at least for now, and this may change, but for now, as of the date of this recording, 10/24/2021, you cannot access global variables from inside of the custom properties that you create. Okay, so for whatever reason, it's not possible at this time. All right, so that is that. Now we can move on along to the next function, and this is where things get really fun, really interesting. So on the screen, I have another headless function. This is called date function, and I have one custom property called end of month, and I take some parameters here as well. I have one required that's start date, and then I have an optional one that's called add months. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cancel out of here, and you'll see this over here as well. So if I go to the properties, here's the end of month, EO month, and here's my two parameters that I've added. So custom property, two parameters, this is where they are. The Canvas app, you can't see anything here. Let's go to the screen where this lives. So same thing, we have the information off screen, because I told you that was my preference. It's sitting off screen, and I can call that now because it's on the screen. Date functions 1, so I'm actually calling that here. And again, another text label. I'm calling date functions 1. I'm calling the custom property, and I'm passing in a date, and I'm also wrapping that all around a text value, and I'm formatting that as short date. Okay, so that's how I'm getting this 228. Before we go into the function, it's not going to do you any good to see what I'm doing inside of the component unless you understand the PowerApps function itself. Okay, so I'm using this formula in a label using the other function called today. And so this may get confusing for you or not confusing for you, but basically what's going on is the date function will tear down the date into month. When you get inside of it, it tears down to year, month, and day. And the reason that we want to do that is because essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what is the last day of a given month. And so what we do is we take in the past in date, and then we get the month. Right? And so in this instance, in the month, I'm adding 2 to it. If I were to add 1 to it, notice that it's the date. So today is 10/24/2021. And so what it's doing is it's saying, get me the next month. And so when I get the next month, it's giving me November. Right? So I'm getting November. And then I'm saying, give me the day of November. And it's going to give me the first day of November. And then at the very end, I'm tacking on this to -1 day so that I get the last day of the month. So let me remove the .1, and then you'll see kind of more what I'm talking about. So it takes today, it gets the month, and I'm adding a month to it, and I'm going to the first day of the month. So that's how I'm setting it, all based on today's date. So I'm basically just getting whatever the current date is, I'm adding a month to it, and I'm hard coding the month to the first day of the following month. And then I'm just backing out that day to get to the last day of the month by just minusing 1. So that's how I know that this is in fact that. So I could change this up by, instead of using today, I could use, say, April let's use February, because we know there's 28 days usually in February except for leap year. So 2/15/2021. All right, now we've got some formatting issues, probably from the way that it needs to be passed in. I'm not sure how it's supposed to be passed in. I'll have to go read the docs on it. That's how you get kind of spun around. So let's do it backwards. Let's do 21/15. I forget how it goes. Maybe 2. Anyway, I'll just use today for right now, because it has to be a particular format. It's going back to 1969, so I'm not passing in the date in the way that it expects it. I'll have to read the docs to make sure that I know how to do that is. So it should work, because this is how it is there. Or maybe it's just seeing it without the timestamp, and that's why it's freaking out. I don't know. But in any event, I know that I passed today, and it works just fine there. Again, have to read the docs and see what's going on further. So now that you understand how the function itself works, now you'll see that I'm now using the component. And I'm calling my component, I'm calling the parameter, the custom property, right? And I'm passing in the single parameter. And if I go into the components, into my date functions, end of month, output property, I showed you this earlier, start date, and then we've got add months. So if we come back out to the screen and we see how I'm using it, I'm passing in the February here. And it works here, and it's because I'm probably formatting things out differently. But if I look and see what I'm doing calculation-wise inside the function, I have to go to the date function. I have to go into the end of month, because this is the output property. This is where the calculation's happening, right? And so underneath that, I have my parameters that's coming in, and then I can use those input variables in this calculation for this custom property. So here I'm doing that same type of thing, right? And so I have the add months, right? Except in this case, I'm not passing in any add months. I could go back to the screen, and instead of passing it there, let's see, end of month, let's see, inside of here, I should be able to add months. Let's add 2 months, right? So now I can go to essentially the end of the month based on the first parameter, and now I can just say fast forward 2 months, right? Because this is an optional parameter. It works just fine without it, okay? So inside the component, again, going to the end of month, custom property, if it's provided, I can use it. And if it's not provided, then it's no big deal. It essentially just comes out to, what it needs to be. Now, the key is the parameter for add months. I have to specify a default value of 0. And it's because if I don't provide a parameter, I still need to have a value as it relates to the actual custom property formula that I have written, right? Because I am referencing it. So essentially, this is just getting replaced with 0. So in that case, if nobody provides a value, there still actually is a value. It's just 0. Nothing happens. But if they do provide it, then it gets passed in, and it'll override 0 with, like you just saw me do, with 2. So that's how this works. And so now you're starting to hopefully see where these components can be used, why they're so powerful. And I want to show you another example here of the, let's see here, global scope. This is this one. We've already covered this guy. All right, here is the collections. On this one, I'm doing pretty much what I did at the example here, except instead of just pulling a variable or calling a variable, I'm doing the same type of thing, except I'm able to get the collection. So inside of this, I have a color parameter that I'm getting, and it's coming in. And so this is allowing me to set the background color of my grid. And inside of the component, I have a gallery. And inside of the gallery, I am setting the collection table, which was done on the application start. And in order for me to access that, I have to remember to flip this switch called Access App Scope. Because again, if I turn that off, I can't get to the collection because the collection is located out inside of the, outside of the component. It's at the application level. And so the key here is that if you use it like this, I need to always make sure that my collection name is called col table. Because if I change the collection name in the application where I'm doing the on start, if I change that here, it's going to break inside the component. Okay, so another better way may be to go ahead and let this be whatever it wants to be, except when I call it to accept an input parameter of type collection or record or table rather, and then just pass in the name. So that's another way of making it work. I don't know if you followed that with what I just said, but essentially it's another way of just taking the input so it knows which collection or which table to use. That way you don't wind up breaking something, or you have the ability to change it, and then you just have to change where you're calling it. And you don't have to worry about going into the component and changing it inside. And so on this screen, you see that I have two instances. Here's the first instance, and here's the second instance. And on the second instance, you'll notice that the fill property for this, my GB color, is the 2255, and you'll see that here. If I look over here, I see that my GB color isn't set at all. And that's because inside of the component, I'm providing a default value for this. So if I go to my col grid and I go to my GB grid color, I have a default value. Just like you saw me set the default value earlier, I can also do the default value here. That way, if something's not provided, then it's okay, right? Nothing's going to break. All right, and the last and final one that we have for the components is going to be, actually we don't need this one because I accidentally created it, is this date picker. So the date picker gets pretty interesting because I have the third and final choice, which is the behavior. It's not input, it's not output, it's behavior. And so I've called it on change specifically. So now that we've seen everything up until this point, let's go ahead and look at this date picker a little bit closer. And specifically, let's look at my custom property. So in the on change, all I have is true or false. It's a Boolean value. Now, inside of the date picker, I have the default date as of today. But what's interesting here is the onChange event for this date picker. I am going ahead and I'm setting the parameters for my component, which is begin and end. I'm changing it internally to itself. Okay? And so when I make a change inside the component itself is updating. It's essentially the component is calling itself. And so as a result of that, I go to my date picker. I go to my onChange. I have the true. And so it flips this bit from true to false to true. And I'm capturing that change on the outside. So let's look at the date picker. Here I have my date picker. And here, for my onChange, I'm detecting when that bit gets flipped. And every time that bit gets flipped, I'm capturing that, and I'm capturing what the date is that's sent, and I'm also capturing the date in both instances, whether any of the date pickers are changed, the beginning or the end. And then I'm popping up this notification. And in addition to that, after that, I'm setting two variables called begin and end, and that's what these text box values are. So let's watch and see what happens. So the behavior on change is inside the component, going to update itself from inside itself, because this control, this date picker control, has an onChange event. And all I'm doing is I'm firing the onChange event of the custom property that flips the bit. But I'm also grabbing the parameter so that I know what the date is set. As soon as I set this and hit OK, I'm capturing that because the bit's flipped when I called it. And now you'll see that I'm getting this notification. Not only is the notification firing, but I'm also setting the variables that populate these labels. So this is kind of neat, because now what I can do is use this component, this date picker component, in any app that I want. And if that was the desired functionality, I could so do it. And so now I have this nice little date picker control. So imagine a more complicated version of this with lots of fields and lots of stuff, and maybe some calculations and things of that nature. But you want it portable, and you want to be able to bring it in from place to place to place, app to app, or whatever the case may be. And so in this case, you now have a nice little encapsulated widget, just like that you're using inside of the Canvas apps when you pull in a label control, or pull in a gallery, or pull in whatever. Now you got a little date picker control with a beginning and an end date, and you got a way of simply, capturing what the settings are of this on the fly. And you don't have to rebuild any of it. You just have to call it and set some parameters to capture the change when that happens. And so that's kind of the benefit of the change behavior. So, and because of that, I can also capture the variables inside, the parameter values inside, because I set them at the control level for its property on change. And so hopefully that made sense. If not, you can just go through and look at the code and kind of see what's going on here. But sorry this was a long video, but components are very, very hard to wrap your heads around. And I wanted to show the full functionality of components, especially some of the new features as it exists in the third quarter 2021. That's it for this video. We'll see you in the next one. Have a great day.